Hello, I'm Norm Warner and these are Norm's Real Estate Tips. I'm speaking to you today again from my home in Milford, Michigan, where I work for Real Estate One as a full-time realtor. Everything we've been doing up till now has been leading up to this video. This video will discuss the closing of the sale we've been talking about. If you recall, many videos ago, we started out with a video about what to do before you even start looking. We covered some things like getting a good realtor, getting a good mortgage agent, getting pre-approved, and just basically being ready to move from being a looker into becoming a buyer. Then we covered in another video the etiquette for making home visits before we went out. And we covered things that you should and shouldn't do, like not looking in medicine cabinets, not looking in people's chest of drawers, but we covered the things you could do and should do while you're there. And then we actually had a video on the visits themselves, and I gave you some tips of things you should be looking for to make the most out of the visit so that you don't come back later and have missed some key things that you should have seen during the visit. Then we went through a 3-part series of videos on making an offer. The first 2 parts really were focused primarily on the forms themselves. The seller's disclosure, the lead-based paint, the forms you needed to review and sign before you moved to the offer form. Then we covered in great detail the offer form itself. I kind of went through that paragraph by paragraph so you understood what was going to be in your offer and what your obligations were to set dates for things happening and so forth. And then we actually talked about what to do if the seller rejects your offer or makes a counter offer. So we gave you some tips and strategies on the negotiations back and forth to try to get to a reasonable agreement and an accepted offer. Then this last video we discussed how to deal with, or the things to do after the offer was accepted that you need to be doing, such as getting your home inspection done, getting your floodplain determined whether you're in that or not, getting the actual application for the mortgage done rather than just the pre-approval. So there were quite a few things that you needed to get done between the acceptance of the offer and the closing that we're about to discuss. Then in the last video we discussed how to deal with issues or problems that might have occurred while you were doing those things. Finding something that really bothered you during the home inspection that you need to get the seller to resolve was one topic. Dealing with the issue of low appraisal. What happens when the appraisal comes in too low and you need to negotiate about that was another topic. So we covered the various things that you might run into as you go from accepted offer to the closing. But let's assume for this video that we've gotten through all that process. Anything you found, we've negotiated a settlement that's satisfactory to you, so you're really ready to close. Well, the first step in the closing is something you've been waiting for all along, and that's the clear to close. The underwriter, who you will have known very well by now because you've given him the entire story of your financial life, the underwriter will have reviewed all of your documents and approved them and basically said that you are creditworthy for this mortgage and gives the clearance, thus the clear to close, to go ahead and close the deal. So what happens in the next steps here? Well, the underwriter will normally have done that about 3 or 4 days ahead of the closing because the law requires these days that the mortgage company provide to you, through the title company normally, a thing called the closing disclosure. This is a 5-page document mandated by recent consumer laws that basically explains in great and hopefully clear detail to you how the costs were calculated and arrived at for all of the costs that you're going to have to incur to go through closing. So not only is it the offer price you gave, but all of the fees, the taxes, the insurance, everything that contributed to what's called the closing costs are detailed in this closing disclosure. Hopefully it's not a surprise to you. If you remember at the front end, I told you you should have gotten what's called a good faith estimate, which is the mortgage company telling you up front what they think your costs were going to be. And hopefully this closing disclosure is not totally out of line with what was on that document. If it is, you need to resolve that with your mortgage company and find out if they made some sort of mistake, and maybe they need to step up and eat some of that mistake if they did make it on their part. But you'll be reviewing that and making sure that you're satisfied that you understand where all the costs came from, and more importantly, what you have to bring into the closing to consummate the deal. So what should you bring to closing? Well, I would have told you in the old days you need to bring a certified or cashier's check for the amount of that you owe that the disclosure has told you, which usually involves some amount of the down payment, the closing costs, etc. These days, due to concerns with fraud and other issues, most closing companies or title companies are requiring that any amount over $20,000 be wired in to the closing by your bank. So instead of you walking in with a big check for, let's say, $80 or $50,000, $60,000, they're going to wire that money in to the closing, so you don't have to worry about getting that check. If it's less than $20,000, you will have to get a certified or cashier's check. I've actually seen one closing get totally delayed when a foreign buyer who wasn't familiar with our standards and how we do business walked into closing with cash. The title company, you would think cash is golden, but the title company will not deal with cash. They have to have the money in a certified form or a cashier's check, or it has to be wired in. In that particular closing, the buyer had to run out to a local bank with his cash and go buy a cashier's check to bring back to closing. So you'll be expected to bring your driver's license to prove who you are, and hopefully there are no other documents that you need to bring in with you, but if there's anything that maybe you sent copies in and they want to see the originals at closing, you can bring those type of things too. The closing is normally conducted at the listing agent's office. At least that's how it's done in this part of Michigan as kind of a standard procedure. In some cases, the title company or the mortgage company may insist that the closing be at their location, and that's okay too. The location isn't that critical, it's just traditional. So you'll be at a nice closing table, closing office, and the closer, the person from the title company, will come in with a huge packet of documents, most of which you're going to have to sign as the buyer, so get used to writing your initials and your name. The sellers are normally expected to bring the keys, the garage door openers. They need their licenses to prove who they are too. If there's any money that they need to kick into the deal, maybe that was one of those cases where the seller had to put some money in due to a appraisal issue or whatever, then they'll need to bring a check for that too, a cashier's check. Normally they walk out with checks instead of bringing checks in, but I have seen cases, especially in places like short sales, where the seller even had to bring cash into the deal. So the process basically when you get there is you sit around a table, the closer explains all the documents one by one, passes them around the table for initials or signatures. You'll get writer's cramp before the day is over just signing your name. Most people get kind of a kick out of how their signature changes over that half hour or so while they're sitting there signing and signing and signing. If the closing goes successfully to the end, the closer will probably excuse themselves and go make copies, and that's a good time to talk between the seller and the buyer. Maybe the seller can explain some things to the buyer about the house that the buyer may not know. They talk a little bit about the neighbors in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. It's a kind of a nice time to just chat between the old and the new owner. One of the things the closer will point out to you when they come back, they normally will put what's called the property transfer affidavit on the top of the form or the packet that they give to the seller and the buyer. And basically the buyer is requested to go to the local treasurer's office, whether it's a township, a city, whatever, and they must turn in and get that affidavit, proof that they've turned that in, stamped. Normally the closer will give you a copy that you get stamped so that you have proof in your packet that you in fact turned in that affidavit. That's the way the taxing authority registers the fact that the person who bought it is now to be taxed for the house instead of the old person. You will need to file that for in Michigan for getting a property tax exemption if you're an owner occupant of the house. So if the seller did not have occupancy, you will at this point be given the keys, the garage door openers, and everything else. Congratulations, you own a house. If you did give the seller some occupancy, you won't get the keys or the garage door openers today. You'll just go home and be a landlord for a while the seller is now a tenant in your house. Hopefully you don't do anything like bugging him all the time while he's trying to get packed up and get out of the house. But that's the process. At this point in time, it's mainly, hopefully it's just a matter of signing all the documents. Hopefully there were no surprises. Everything went smooth. In all the years I've been doing real estate, I have very seldom seen any closings that totally blow up. Occasionally you'll hit an issue that needs to be negotiated on the spot, but generally because the seller wants to sell and the buyer wants to buy, it's easy to come to some compromise and work things out. So again, that was the closing process. We'll begin a new series shortly for sellers, but this is at this point Norm's Real Estate Tips for Buyers. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.